Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to treat biology not just as the study of living things, but as the absolute ultimate construction project. We're going to decode exactly how simple, totally non-living atoms come together to create the mind-boggling complexity of life. So to kick things off, think about this. What in the world do an 11,000-year-old pygmy mammoth, a single drop of human sweat, and the DNA inside your very cells actually have in common? Well, it's pretty amazing to realize that everything in the universe, from extinct mammals to your own genetics, is bound by the exact same chemical rules. Whether you're looking at a living, breathing organism or just a rock on the ground, the fundamental laws of chemistry and physics are calling the shots. Section 1. Meet the building blocks. At its core, all life is just made up of matter. But here's the wild part. Despite our immense complexity, you and I are predominantly built from just 4 basic ingredients. Oxygen makes up roughly 65% of you, carbon 18%, hydrogen 10%, and nitrogen 3%. So together, those 4 elements account for a staggering 96% of your body's mass. It's a highly specialized arrangement, especially when you compare it to what you'd find in the Earth's crust or the atmosphere.
Now, if we dig one step deeper, the atoms of these elements are built from even smaller parts. Right in the center, you've got a nucleus packed with positively charged protons and uncharged neutrons, which is what gives the atom its mass. But the real stars of the show when it comes to biology, those would be the electrons. They weigh practically nothing, but they completely dictate how an element behaves, how stable it is, and exactly who it wants to bond with. You see, atoms are constantly striving for energetic stability, which usually means they just want to fill up that outermost electron shell.
And get this, we can actually use the structure of these atoms to literally peer back in time. While protons define what an element is, the number of neutrons can actually vary, creating different versions of an atom called isotopes. Some of these, like carbon-14, are unstable, so they slowly lose energy through radioactive decay. Once an organism dies, it totally stops taking in new carbon-14. And because we know that exactly half of it will decay into nitrogen-14 every 5,730 years, scientists can just measure what's left to calculate an age. That predictable decay is exactly how researchers successfully dated the remains of that pygmy mammoth to 11,000 years ago. Pretty cool, right?
Section 2. Making connections, chemical bonds.
Okay, so we've got our raw materials, but how do they actually connect? Well, like I mentioned, atoms desperately want to be stable, and they pull this off by managing their electrons using 2 main strategies. The first is an ionic bond, which is basically an outright electron theft. One atom completely transfers an electron to another, which creates oppositely charged ions that snap together, kind of like how sodium and chlorine make ordinary table salt. But in the biological world, the second strategy is way more common, and that's the covalent bond. Think of this as a cooperative partnership where atoms share pairs of electrons to fill their outer shells, creating the really strong, stable molecules that make up things like your DNA and your proteins. But here's a really crucial detail about covalent bonds. Atoms don't always share nicely. In a nonpolar covalent bond, like you'd find in methane gas, the electrons are shared right down the middle, completely equal. But in a polar covalent bond, one atom acts like a bit of an electron hog. Take water, for instance. Oxygen has a way stronger pull on electrons than hydrogen does. And because those negatively charged electrons are spending more of their time hanging out near the oxygen atom, the oxygen actually gets a slight negative charge, leaving the hydrogens with a slight positive charge. So those partial charges we just talked about, they end up creating weaker, temporary connections between different molecules, which we call hydrogen bonds. Because opposites attract, the slightly positive hydrogen of one molecule will just stick to a slightly negative atom of a neighboring molecule. Now, on their own, these bonds are pretty weak, but together, they are mighty. Millions of hydrogen bonds are responsible for literally zipping together the 2 strands of your DNA double helix. But because they are relatively weak, they can be broken pretty easily by something like heat. If you've ever used a hair straightener, you are quite literally using heat to break the hydrogen bonds that maintain the curl in your hair proteins. When your hair gets wet again, the bonds reform, and boom, the curl comes right back. Section 3. Water, the magic molecule. Let's move on and see how these bonds create the absolute perfect environment for biological construction. Water has what I like to call Goldilocks properties. It just keeps conditions exactly right. First off, unlike most substances, it's actually less dense as a solid, which is why ice floats and acts as a blanket to protect aquatic life during the winter. Second, it acts as a massive biological thermostat, regulating temperatures in our bodies and across the entire globe. And third, it takes a huge amount of heat to vaporize it, making sweating an incredibly effective way to cool you down and keep your internal systems humming along. Water is also highly sticky. Because of all those hydrogen bonds, water molecules love to stick to each other, which is a property called cohesion. This creates surface tension strong enough that insects like water striders can literally walk right across the surface of a pond. Water also loves to stick to other charged surfaces, which we call adhesion. When cohesion and adhesion team up, they allow towering California redwood trees to pull water all the way from their roots 300 feet straight up into the air just to reach their highest leaves. It's a total mechanical marvel, and it's driven entirely by chemical bonds.
Section 4. Balancing act, pH, and buffers.
Within this watery environment, life relies on an incredibly delicate chemical balancing act. And the scale we're dealing with here is just staggering. 6.02 times 10 to the 23rd power. That is a mole. It represents trillions upon trillions of molecules interacting simultaneously in just a tiny, tiny splash of liquid.
And out of all those water molecules, a very small percentage spontaneously break apart into free hydrogen ions and hydroxide ions. This is exactly what creates the pH scale, which measures the concentration of those free hydrogen ions. The scale is unbelievably delicate. Pure water is a perfectly neutral 7.0, and human blood is tightly regulated at roughly 7.4. Seawater is a weakly basic 8.0. But your stomach? That's a highly acidic 1.0 to 2.0. In fact, the human stomach is so incredibly acidic that its own cells can't survive it. Your body actually has to replace your entire stomach lining every 7 to 10 days just to keep up with the damage.
So the big takeaway here is that our bodies absolutely must maintain these specific pH zones, especially in our blood, or we literally won't survive. So how do we pull it off? We use these ingenious buffering systems. If excess acid gets into your bloodstream, a buffer called bicarbonate instantly binds to those dangerous ions. That forms carbonic acid, which then safely converts into carbon dioxide gas and water. The CO2 travels up to your lungs, and you literally just breathe the acidic problem away. It's this elegant, continuous loop of chemical homeostasis.
Section 5. Carbon, the framework of life. Now, with our environment perfectly balanced, we finally arrive at the ultimate framing material for life, carbon. If water is the environment, carbon is the architecture. It's uniquely versatile. Remember those electron shells we talked about? Well, carbon has exactly 4 electrons in its outer shell, meaning it can form up to 4 strong covalent bonds with other atoms. It acts just like a universal connector piece. It can bond with itself and other elements to build this endless variety of complex 3D rings or super long linear chains. And, crucially, the bonds between carbon and hydrogen store massive amounts of energy. That's exactly why hydrocarbons make such excellent fuel for both your backyard grill and your own body. But listen, in biology, just having the right ingredients is not enough. The physical architecture matters completely. And this brings us to isomers. An isomer is a molecule that shares the exact same chemical formula, meaning the exact same number of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen atoms, but it has a completely different three-dimensional physical structure. In biology, the physical shape of a molecule dictates exactly how it functions.
That's actually a brilliant example of why this structure is literally a matter of life and death, and why you should always be reading your nutrition labels. Some fats have a double covalent bond in a cis configuration. That puts a physical bend or a kink right in their carbon backbone. Because they're bent, they can't pack tightly together, so they stay a nice, healthy liquid at room temperature. Think of olive oil. But if that double bond is in a trans configuration, the carbon backbone stays perfectly linear. Those molecules pack super tightly together, forming a solid fat at room temperature. That tiny geometric shift is the literal difference between a heart-healthy oil and a dangerous trans fat that's linked to cardiovascular disease. No way around it. Shape is everything. Nature is actually so wildly specific about these molecular shapes that it can even distinguish between mirror images of the exact same molecule. We call these enantiomers. Just like your left and right hands, these molecules are identical, but they cannot be superimposed on top of one another. And get this, life plays favorites. Nature strictly prefers the left-handed or L form of amino acids, like L-alanine, to build our proteins. But when it comes to energy, it switches it up and strongly prefers the right-handed or D form of sugars, like D-glucose. Finally, to make these carbon backbones truly functional, life snaps on little chemical tool belts called functional groups. These are just small clusters of atoms, things like hydroxyls, methyls, or phosphates, that get attached directly to the carbon frame. Each functional group brings its own very specific chemical property. So some might make a molecule more acidic, while others make it highly attractive to water. These little tool belts are what allow giant macromolecules to perform all their highly specialized jobs, from digesting the food you eat to carrying the actual genetic code of your DNA.
So, having seen how elegantly these simple atoms and bonds build our entire world, it leaves you with a pretty profound question. If life on Earth is so perfectly engineered around carbon and water, what entirely different chemical architectures might be out there waiting for us in the universe? Could life exist based on a completely different elemental blueprint altogether? It's definitely something to think about. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning the incredible world around you.